Professor James Monroe drummed his fingers on the conference table, struggling to maintain his professional composure. Across from him sat perhaps the most fascinating being he'd ever encountered, and she was meticulously dissecting a chocolate cupcake. "The texture is most peculiar," Vex commented, her large amber eyes narrowing as she separated frosting from cake with surgical precision. Her emerald skin caught the fluorescent light, and her crimson curls, styled in an attempt to mimic human fashion but failing spectacularly, bounced with each movement. "It's meant to be eaten together," James offered, unable to suppress a smile. As Earth's leading xenocultural liaison at the Interstellar Exchange Program, he'd spent 3 months working with representatives from Proximia, but Vex consistently surprised him. Together? How inefficient. Nevertheless, she recombined the components and took a tentative bite. Her eyes widened. "Fascinating." James cleared his throat. "So, Ambassador Vex, you wanted to discuss something privately?" "Yes." She abruptly set down the cupcake and folded her 6-fingered hands. "I require personal instruction in human mating rituals." James choked on his coffee. "Have I violated a social taboo?" Vex tilted her head, genuine concern in her expression. "No, just unexpected." He dabbed at the coffee stain spreading across his shirt. "May I ask why?" "My research requires comprehension of all fundamental human social behaviors. My species practices logical pair bonding based on genetic compatibility and resource efficiency. Yet humans engage in this elaborate ritual called dating that seems highly inefficient but culturally significant." She leaned forward. "I've consumed your romantic entertainment media, but the behaviors remain perplexing." James fought back laughter. "You've been watching rom-coms?" "Precisely. 53 of them." Her expression remained serious. "The scientific literature on human courtship is extensive, but contradictory. I require practical experience." "You want me to teach you how to date?" "Affirmative." Vex produced a tablet from her bag, scrolling through notes. "You are unmarried, heterosexual, and according to your colleague Dr. Patel, not completely hopeless with women. You are therefore qualified." James ran a hand through his dark hair. "I'm not sure this is within my professional duties, Ambassador. Please call me Vex when discussing personal matters." She blinked. "And I'm not requesting this as an ambassador but as a xenoanthropologist. My research will benefit both our species. Vex, reading about dating or watching movies is one thing, but actually experiencing it." "Exactly my hypothesis." She brightened. "Cultural immersion is superior to theoretical study. I propose an experiment. You will take me on what humans call a proper date, and I will document my observations." James considered the awkwardness of explaining to his superiors why he was dating an alien diplomat. Yet Vex's earnest scientific curiosity was oddly endearing. "This would be strictly professional," he clarified. "An educational exercise." "Of course." She looked mildly offended. "Did you think I was proposing actual mate selection? Proximians and humans are biologically incompatible." "Right. Obviously." He felt his cheeks warm. "Just making sure we're on the same page." "We are on the same tablet." She smiled, revealing slightly pointed teeth. "Tomorrow evening, then?" "I've researched appropriate venues and prepared preliminary questions about courtship signals." James found himself nodding. "One condition, no recording devices or public documentation." "Agreed. Though I will take mental notes." Vex stood, smoothing her slightly too formal human attire. "I appreciate your participation, James. My colleagues thought human dating rituals too illogical to merit serious study." As she gathered her things, James wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Teaching an alien the nuances of human romance seemed absurd. Yet something about Vex's earnest curiosity made him genuinely look forward to their experiment. "James?" Vex paused at the door. "Is it customary to feel what humans call butterflies before a date? I'm experiencing unusual abdominal sensations." "Actually," he replied with a smile, "that's perfectly normal." "Fascinating," she whispered, placing a hand on her stomach as she departed. James watched her go, realizing with surprise that he felt those same butterflies himself. "Is this garment sufficiently attractive?" Vex stood in the doorway of James's office the following afternoon, causing him to nearly spill his coffee for the second time in 2 days. She wore what appeared to be a wedding dress, complete with train and veil, paired incongruously with combat boots and a leather jacket. Several passing colleagues slowed to stare. "That's not exactly date attire," James managed, quickly ushering her inside and closing the door. But the film wedding planner indicated white dresses create optimal attraction. Vex's brow furrowed, creating little green wrinkles above her amber eyes. And rebel without a cause suggested leather signals desirability. James pinched the bridge of his nose. "We need to talk about context." 3 hours later, they stood in a department store, surrounded by discarded outfits. James had cancelled his afternoon meetings, realizing this experiment required more preparation than anticipated. "Human fashion appears deliberately contradictory," Vex observed, examining a sundress with scientific scrutiny. "Your dating guide suggests appearing effortless, while simultaneously advising extensive preparation." "Dating isn't exactly logical," James admitted, leaning against a display. "It's about connection, not rules." "Yet you have countless rules." Vex emerged from the dressing room in a simple emerald dress that complemented her skin tone perfectly. "Is this acceptable?" James felt his breath catch. Without her usual attempt to mimic human fashion, Vex looked stunning. The dress highlighted her elegant posture and the graceful way she moved. "That's, yes. Very acceptable." Vex tilted her head, studying his reaction with interest. "Your pupils dilated 20% and your respiration increased. According to my research, these are attraction indicators." James cleared his throat. "Just thinking about the scientific aspects of our experiment." "Of course." She nodded seriously, though her lips curved slightly. "Next, we must acquire flowers. The purpose remains unclear, but 86% of romantic films feature them." As they exited the store, James felt increasingly aware of the curious glances they received. While interspecies diplomatic relations had been established for years, social interaction remained uncommon. "Does public observation concern you?" Vex asked perceptively as they walked toward the florist. "I'm more concerned about you," James replied honestly. "People can be xenophobic." "Yes. We have similar issues on Proximia." She straightened her shoulders. "However, scientific progress requires courage." James found himself admiring her determination. "You know, most humans would be nervous about a first date. You're treating it like a mission." "Nervousness is inefficient," Vex stated, though her 6 fingers fidgeted with her purse strap. "Though I admit to certain physiological responses that approximate your concept of anxiety." At the florist, Vex approached the selection methodically, examining each bloom for optimal color and symmetry while questioning the biological purpose of gifting plants that would soon die. "Perhaps it symbolizes the inherent transience of romantic attachment," she theorized, selecting a vibrant bouquet. James laughed. "Or maybe pretty things just make people happy. Simple pleasure as sufficient motivation?" Vex considered this. "My species often overlook such concepts." As evening approached, they returned to James's apartment so he could change. Vex wandered his living space like an anthropologist discovering a new civilization, examining photographs and books with intense interest. Your dwelling contains many inefficiencies, she noted, picking up a snow globe from his shelf. Like what? This miniature precipitation simulation serves no practical function. She shook it, watching the glittering flakes swirl. Yet it creates an emotional response. Fascinating. James emerged from his bedroom adjusting his tie. Ready for your crash course in human dating? Vex set down the snow globe and turned to him. For a moment, her scientific detachment faltered, revealing something vulnerable and curious beneath. I have one final question before we proceed, she said softly. In your films, dates frequently end with physical contact, specifically this kissing behavior. James felt heat rise to his face. That's not mandatory. It's only if both people feel. I understand consent parameters, she interrupted. My question is, physiologically, what triggers the impulse to initiate such contact? How does one recognize the appropriate moment? James stepped closer, suddenly aware of the faint, unfamiliar scent that surrounded her, something like cinnamon and ozone. It's not something you can analyze, Vex. When the moment's right, you just know. She studied his face with those remarkable amber eyes. That is profoundly unscientific. Welcome to human dating. He smiled, offering his arm. Shall we begin the experiment? Vex hesitated, then placed her six-fingered hand on his arm with surprising gentleness. I predict this will be most educational. As they left the apartment, James realized he'd stopped thinking of the evening as a professional courtesy or amusing anecdote. Somewhere between wedding dresses and snow globes, he'd begun genuinely looking forward to showing Vex the strange, illogical wonders of human romance, and perhaps discovering something unexpected himself. The restaurant James selected, a small Italian place with dim lighting and candles flickering on each table, seemed to fascinate Vex from the moment they entered. The illumination is insufficient for proper visibility, she whispered, yet appears deliberately designed to create optical intimacy. Clever manipulation of environmental psychology. James smiled as he pulled out her chair. Some things are better appreciated in soft light. Including facial imperfections, I imagine, Vex observed, studying the menu with scientific intensity. When the waiter approached, she straightened. I will have the spaghetti. Films suggest it holds romantic significance. As they waited for their food, James found himself unexpectedly engaged by Vex's perspective. Her observations about human behaviors others took for granted were surprisingly insightful. So dining together serves multiple functions beyond nutritional intake, she noted, sipping her water. Information exchange, compatibility assessment, and mutual vulnerability through potential food spillage. James laughed. I've never thought about dating quite that way. How do you think about it? Her amber eyes locked onto his with disarming directness. James considered the question seriously. I guess, as a way to discover if someone makes you feel more alive just by being around them. More alive? Vex's head tilted. That suggests your baseline existence lacks sufficient vitality. Sometimes it does, he admitted, surprised by his own candor. Work, routine, responsibilities, they can make life predictable. Dating is about finding someone who breaks that pattern. Vex nodded slowly. Disruption as a positive force. Counterintuitive, yet understandable. When their spaghetti arrived, Vex approached it with characteristic methodicalness, carefully twirling each strand. In Lady and the Tramp, the characters consumed a single noodle simultaneously, resulting in accidental oral contact, she noted. Is this common practice? James nearly choked on his wine. That's more cartoon than reality. Disappointing. Your cultural depictions often exaggerate romantic behaviors. She dabbed her lips delicately. Though I now understand why spaghetti is symbolically significant, it requires concentration, creating natural silence and observation opportunities. As dinner progressed, James found himself talking about his childhood dreams of space exploration that had eventually led to xenocultural diplomacy. Vex shared stories of her homeworld, a place of mathematical cities and practical beauty, and her status as somewhat of an outlier for her interest in the messy irrationality of other species. My colleagues believe emotional behavior represents evolutionary inefficiency, she explained. I suggest it creates adaptability and innovation. Our debate continues. James realized he'd completely forgotten the experimental nature of their outing. He was simply enjoying her company, her unique insights, the elegant way she gestured with her six-fingered hands, the occasional flashes of humor behind her analytical facade. When dessert arrived, tiramisu for two, Vex hesitated before taking a bite. Her expression transformed into something approaching wonder. The sensory complexity. She murmured. This exceeds nutritional requirement. It's pleasure for its own sake. That's kind of the point of dessert, James smiled. And dates, really. Inefficient, yet. She took another bite, closing her eyes briefly. Perhaps efficiency isn't always optimal. When the check arrived, Vex immediately reached for it. My research indicates payment dynamics carry significant meaning in dating rituals. Usually the person who does the asking pays, James explained. So technically that's me. But I initiated the experiment, she countered. Though I've also read about going Dutch, an idiom with peculiar historical origins. Their hands touched briefly over the bill, and James noticed how Vex's skin felt warmer than human temperature, like sun-heated silk. She withdrew her hand quickly, looking almost flustered. Perhaps we could conduct a hybrid payment model, she suggested, her usual scientific tone slightly less steady. Outside the restaurant, the night air was cool and clear. James had planned a simple dinner and polite goodnight, keeping the experiment controlled and professional. Yet something about the evening, about Vex herself, made him reluctant to end it. Protocol suggests the male should now transport the female to her dwelling, Vex stated, though she made no move toward the waiting taxi. That's one option, James replied, looking up at the star-filled sky. But the experiment isn't necessarily complete. Vex's crimson curls caught the streetlight as she tilted her head. What additional variables require testing? Well, James said, surprising himself with his next words, dating isn't just about restaurants and conversation. Sometimes the most important parts happen spontaneously. Spontaneity, Vex repeated, as if testing an unfamiliar concept. Unpredictability as a desired outcome rather than a flaw in experimental design. Exactly. James offered his hand. Care to test the hypothesis? After a moment's hesitation, Vex placed her hand in his. For science, she said softly, though the look in her amber eyes suggested she might be developing additional motivations beyond pure research. Music pulsed through the nightclub like a living heartbeat, lights painting the crowd in electric blues and purples. Vex stood at the edge of the dance floor, her analytical composure temporarily overwhelmed. The auditory stimulation exceeds optimal levels, she shouted over the music, yet participants appear to find it pleasurable rather than distressing. James leaned closer. It's about letting go of thinking for a while. Cessation of cognition as a recreational activity? Vex looked genuinely puzzled. My species considers that deeply problematic. Not stopping thinking entirely, James clarified with a smile. Just feeling instead of analyzing. Vex observed the dancers, her head slightly tilted, crimson curls catching the strobe lights. James had chosen this place specifically for its diverse clientele, humans mingled with various non-terrestrial visitors, making Vex less conspicuous. The movements appear non-standardized, she observed. Each individual interprets the rhythmic patterns differently. That's the point. There's no right way to dance. James offered his hand. Want to try? Hesitation flickered across her face. I lack the necessary protocols. Perfect. Dancing isn't about following protocols. After a moment's deliberation, Vex nodded decisively. A comprehensive experiment requires embracing all variables. On the dance floor, Vex initially moved with mechanical precision, attempting to replicate the motions of those around her. James demonstrated simple steps, but soon realized she wasn't enjoying the experience, she was studying it. Stop thinking about how you look, he suggested, moving closer to be heard. Just feel the music. Let it move through you. Music is vibration, not a sentient force capable of locomotion, she replied, but her expression suggested she was trying to understand. The DJ transitioned to a slower, more hypnotic beat. James gently placed his hands on Vex's shoulders. Close your eyes, he suggested. Surprisingly, she complied. With her eyes closed, something subtle shifted in her posture, the analytical rigidity gradually melting away. Slowly, her movements became more fluid, her body swaying with increasing naturalness. James found himself captivated. Without her scientific observer's gaze, Vex moved with an alien grace that was utterly mesmerizing. The green of her skin caught the blue lights, creating an almost ethereal glow. When she opened her eyes, something had changed in her expression, a new awareness, both vulnerable and powerful. I believe I understand, she said, her voice carrying a rare softness. The purpose is to create synchronized consciousness through rhythm. Something like that, James agreed, suddenly very aware of their proximity. They danced for what might have been minutes or hours, conversation giving way to movement. James noticed other couples watching them with curiosity or admiration. They had unconsciously created a style of movement that was neither fully human nor fully proximian. Later, at the club's rooftop bar, they found a quiet corner overlooking the city lights. Vex's usual scientific patter had diminished, replaced by a contemplative silence. Your cardiovascular rate remained elevated for an extended period, she finally noted, though her clinical tone seemed forced. Is that typical during dancing? It's not just the dancing, James admitted. Their eyes met, and for once, Vex didn't immediately analyze or categorize the moment. I find myself experiencing unexpected physiological responses as well, she confessed quietly. My species regulates emotional processes through neurostabilization, yet I seem to be overriding those systems. Is that bad? It's unprecedented. She looked down at her hands. My research was intended to be observational, not participatory. The best science sometimes happens when experiments take unexpected turns, James suggested. Vex considered this. On Proximia, deviation from research parameters is considered failure. On Earth, we call it discovery. Their hands rested inches apart on the table between them. Neither moved to close the distance, yet both seemed acutely aware of it. James, Vex said suddenly, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain, in your films, there is often a moment when physical proximity triggers a decision point regarding intimate contact. Yes, he replied, his mouth unexpectedly dry. I believe we may be approaching such a juncture. Her amber eyes held a question she seemed unable to formulate with her usual precision. James felt himself leaning slightly forward. The hypothesis needs testing? For science, she whispered, but the tremble in her voice suggested something beyond academic interest. As they moved closer, the city lights reflecting in her remarkable eyes, James realized with startling clarity that this had ceased being an experiment for him some time ago. Dawn found them walking along the river, the city slowly awakening around them. They hadn't gone back to either of their residences. Instead, they'd spent the night talking, dancing, and exploring the curious space that had opened between them. The kiss, when it finally happened on that rooftop, had been brief but transformative, a hypothesis proven in unexpected ways. Neither had pushed for more, both recognizing the need to understand what was developing between them. Your world is most beautiful at this transitional period, Vex observed, watching the sunrise paint the buildings in gold. Her scientific detachment had returned somewhat, though tempered now with something warmer. Transitions often are beautiful, James replied. The spaces between defined states. Vex nodded thoughtfully. Like our current situation. They found a bench overlooking the water and sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Vex's crimson curls had escaped their careful styling, framing her face more naturally. I must submit my research findings to my superiors today, she finally said. They expect a comprehensive analysis of human mating rituals. And what will you tell them? James asked. Vex considered this with uncharacteristic hesitation. My data is compromised. I experienced the phenomenon rather than merely observing it. She looked at him directly. It would be scientifically dishonest to pretend otherwise. Does that mean the experiment failed? No. She shook her head. It means I discovered something more significant than expected. My species believes emotion creates bias that inhibits understanding. But I found the opposite, certain knowledge can only be accessed through experience. James smiled. That sounds like a breakthrough. It is. She paused. But it creates complications. My assignment concludes in 17 days. I am expected to return to Proximia and submit to neural recalibration, a process that would realign my thought patterns to standard parameters. James felt something cold settle in his stomach. Would that erase what happened between us? Not erase. But recontextualize as aberrant data. Her six-fingered hand reached for his, an initiated gesture that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. I am considering declining recalibration. That sounds significant. It would effectively end my academic career. She spoke matter-of-factly, though her fingers tightened around his. But I find myself questioning whether strict rationality is truly rational if it requires dismissing valid experiential data. The rising sun caught the green planes of her face, highlighting the delicate patterns that James had come to find so captivating. What about the biological incompatibility you mentioned? He asked quietly. Another hypothesis requiring revision. A smile touched her lips. Compatibility extends beyond reproductive potential. My research now suggests that intellectual and emotional resonance may be equally significant for successful pairing. James felt something expand in his chest, hope, possibility, the unexpected joy of discovering that the universe might be more accommodating to improbability than either of them had imagined. So what now? He asked. Where does your research go from here? Vex looked out at the river, then back to him. I propose a longitudinal study. Extended observation of human Proximian interaction in various contexts. Multiple dates, with progressive variables. That sounds very scientific, James said, unable to suppress his smile. Science adapts to new evidence, Vex replied, her amber eyes holding his. And the evidence suggests that this experiment has only begun. As the city awakened around them, James found himself contemplating how quickly the universe could reorganize itself, how an academic curiosity could transform into something neither of them had predicted but both now seemed reluctant to relinquish. I came to study human dating, Vex said softly, completing the thought that had begun the night before. I did not anticipate becoming a participant in the phenomenon. The best discoveries are often unexpected, James replied, gently brushing a crimson curl from her face. Indeed. Her smile, genuine, unanalyzed, and freely given, was perhaps the most significant data point yet. I believe humans have a term for when experiments yield unexpected but significant results. Serendipity? Yes. Vex nodded, leaning slightly closer. A most unscientific concept. Yet strangely satisfying. As their lips met again, with greater confidence and deeper understanding than before, neither was thinking about experiments or hypotheses or data points. In the space between their two worlds, something new and unexpected had formed, something that defied analysis but invited exploration. For now, that was hypothesis enough.